What if the way you have been trying to calm your restless mind has only been making the storm inside louder? What if every technique you have tried to silence your anxiety, every desperate effort to chase away sleepless nights, has been upside down from the very beginning? And what if the answer you have been searching for is not something new to add into your life, but an ancient wisdom that has been quietly waiting for you for over 2,000 years? Tonight, you are not simply listening to stories. You are stepping into a living current of wisdom that has guided seekers, wanderers, and weary souls for centuries. Imagine sitting by a quiet fire while a gentle voice shares timeless lessons. These lessons are not dusty scriptures or forgotten fables. They are living truths that have carried people through heartbreak, loss, and the heaviest burdens. You will hear of a grieving mother who found comfort in the very place she least expected it. You will meet a thief who stumbled into compassion and was changed forever. You will walk alongside kings and monks who discovered that peace was never about conquering the world, but about discovering a stillness that no storm can touch. These are not fairy tales. They are mirrors, and when you look into them, you may find your own story reflected back. And here is what makes this journey different. You do not need to already be calm for this to work. You do not need to practice meditation or call yourself spiritual. You do not need to have the right mindset. All you need to do is listen, because as you listen, something natural begins to happen. Your breathing slows, your shoulders soften, your mind, which has been racing for days or weeks, begins to ease, as if someone quietly lifted a weight you did not know you were carrying. It does not matter if you are lying awake in New York, unable to fall asleep, or if you are in London carrying the stress of a long workday, or if you are somewhere in Canada searching for a moment of peace before the morning begins. Again, wherever you are, you have arrived here at the perfect moment, and you are not here by accident. The truth is that peace is not something far away that you must chase. It is not something you buy, achieve, or fight for. Peace is already here. It has always been here. But in the noise of daily life, in the endless cycle of doing and striving, you may have forgotten how to hear it. Tonight, through these stories, you will remember. So let go for a while. Allow yourself to rest. These stories will carry you where you need to go. Sometimes the greatest act of healing is not to push harder, but simply to stop, listen, and let the quiet wisdom of the ages meet you exactly where you are. The first story, the mirror of the lake. When the night stretches long and restless, the mind often feels like a lake caught in a storm. Waves of thought crash and collide. Fragments of memory stir up from the bottom, and every ripple seems to magnify into something unmanageable. It is in moments like these that ancient stories shine like lanterns in the dark. One of the oldest lessons comes from the time of Ananda, the devoted disciple of the Buddha, and it begins with something as simple as a lake. The story tells of a day when the Buddha asked Ananda to fetch water for the community. The nearest source was a small lake by the roadside. Ananda hurried there, but as he arrived, he saw carts crossing through it. The wheels stirred up mud and leaves, and the once clear water became brown, murky, and filled with floating debris. Ananda stood for a moment holding his pot and thought to himself, "How can I bring this back to the Buddha? This water is useless now." With hesitation, he returned to his teacher and explained what had happened. The Buddha listened and simply said, "Try again. Go back to the lake. Trust it." So Ananda obeyed, although inside he doubted. When he reached the lake once more, he saw the same scene. More carts, more disturbance, more mud spiraling through the water. He thought, "This cannot work. How can such a lake ever give clean water again?" Yet he respected his master, so he waited. After some time passed, the carts stopped coming. The surface grew calmer. The mud no longer stirred, began to sink, and slowly, almost invisibly, the water cleared. By the time Ananda dipped his pot in the water, was fresh, transparent, and perfect to drink. When he brought it back, the Buddha looked into the pot of water and said, "Do you see, Ananda? The mind is just like this lake. When disturbed, it becomes cloudy, confused, impossible to see through. But when left to settle, it clears by its own nature. No force is needed, only patience." The clarity was always there, hidden beneath the surface. This story is simple, yet it carries a depth that can transform the way we approach our own restless thoughts. Most of us have been taught to wrestle with our minds, to argue with unwanted thoughts, or to drown them with distraction. We reach for the phone, scroll endlessly through screens, or push ourselves into more noise in the hope that it will quiet the noise inside. But the ancient teaching of the lake reminds us of a different truth. Fighting the mud only stirs it up more. The path to clarity is not force but stillness. Imagine your own life as a lake. Every stressful moment at work, every difficult conversation, every headline that shakes you becomes a wheel rolling through the water. It stirs emotions, fears, and expectations. And when you rush to fix it immediately, you only agitate the mud further. But if you can allow even a few breaths of stillness, you may notice the same miracle that Ananda did. The mud begins to fall away on its own. Clarity returns without struggle. For audiences today in America, Europe, or Canada, the story of the lake touches something deeply human. We live in societies that celebrate constant action, endless productivity, and quick solutions. The culture tells us to handle stress with strategies, routines, or multitasking. Yet the wisdom of the lake points in another direction. Sometimes the most powerful action is to stop acting, to let the mind rest, and to remember that peace is not something we build but something we uncover. Picture yourself after a long day. You sit on your couch, phone in hand, television humming, and your mind replaying the countless demands of work or family. The lake in you is stirred and you feel the weight of it. Now, imagine setting the phone aside, closing your eyes, and simply breathing. At first, the mud of thoughts may feel even stronger, but if you allow yourself a few quiet minutes, something begins to shift. Just like the lake in the story, the thoughts drift downward. The water of your awareness grows clear enough to reflect the light of calm, and in that clarity, answers and insights come more naturally than if you had forced them. The Buddha used the story of the lake not just to teach about meditation, but to point toward a larger truth about human suffering. We suffer because we resist what is unsettled. We panic when the water is cloudy, forgetting that the very nature of water is clarity. This resistance adds another layer of struggle on top of the storm. But when we step back, breathe, and allow the natural rhythm of life to move, clarity returns. The teaching is radical in its simplicity. It says that peace is not earned through endless effort, but revealed through trust. For a modern listener, this can feel both comforting and challenging. Comforting because it tells us that nothing is wrong with us for feeling cloudy. The mud is part of being human. Challenging because it asks us to do something counterintuitive, to stop trying to control every ripple. In a world that rewards control, surrender feels like weakness. But as the story shows, surrender is the doorway to true strength. Consider how this applies to sleepless nights. Many of us lie awake, battling thoughts, trying harder and harder to force the mind into silence. The more we try, the louder the mind becomes. But if instead we remember the lake, we can approach the night differently. We can let the thoughts be, trust that they will settle, and simply breathe. In time, sleep often comes naturally, not because we conquered the mind, but because we stopped disturbing it. There is also a social dimension to this teaching. Communities too can be like lakes. When events stir up fear and anger, the surface becomes turbulent. If leaders rush to act from that turbulence, more mud rises. But if a community can pause, reflect, and allow wisdom to guide action, clarity emerges. The story of Ananda and the lake is not just personal advice, but a map for collective peace. To make this practice practical, imagine a small exercise. The next time you feel overwhelmed, visualize your mind as a lake. See the mud swirling from the wheels of passing carts. Do not fight it. Instead, picture yourself stepping back from the shore. Wait, watch, breathe. With time, you will notice the water clearing. This is not imagination. It is the actual rhythm of the nervous system, calming of thoughts, releasing of awareness, becoming steady again. The lesson of the lake is timeless because it is not about culture or religion, but about the very nature of the human mind. Whether you are a student in Toronto, a parent in Paris, or a worker in Chicago, your mind responds the same way. Disturb it and it clouds. Leave it and it clears. The wisdom does not belong to the past. It belongs to every moment you choose to remember it. As the Buddha told Ananda, the clarity was always there waiting. In the same way, your clarity is not lost, only hidden beneath the mud of daily life. You do not need to force it back. You simply need to trust the lake inside you. And in that trust, you will discover what generations before you discovered, that peace is never absent, only overlooked. The second story, The broken bowl. When Ananda learned from the lake that clarity comes from patience, the Buddha offered another lesson that seemed even more ordinary yet carried a depth that could change a life. It began with something simple, a clay bowl fragile in the hands of a monk destined to crack and shatter. The story says that one day a disciple was carrying a finely crafted bowl used each morning in the monastery. It had been given by a villager as an offering, and the young monk cherished it. As he walked across the courtyard, he tripped on a loose stone. The bowl slipped from his hands, fell to the ground and shattered into countless pieces. In shock, the monk froze, filled with guilt and fear. This was a gift, he thought, something precious, something entrusted to him. Now it was ruined. When the Buddha approached, the monk immediately bowed, apologizing with trembling words. "Master, I have failed. The bowl is destroyed and I cannot replace it." The Buddha looked at the broken pieces scattered across the earth. For a long moment he said nothing. Then with a calm smile he replied, "The bowl is teaching you even now. Nothing in this world is unbroken forever." The monks gathered around, puzzled. Some expected punishment, others expected sorrow. But instead the Buddha bent down, touched one of the shards and said, "This bowl served its purpose. It carried food, it gave nourishment, it was part of our life. And now, even in its breaking, it teaches us the truth of impermanence. Everything born into this world will one day change form. To cling to it as permanent is to create suffering. To release it is to find peace." The disciples listened, and the young monk's tears softened. He began to see that his pain was not from the broken bowl, but from his desperate wish that it could stay whole forever. This simple image of a shattered bowl speaks across centuries, across cultures, even across continents. In Europe, in America, in Canada, we are surrounded by a culture that worships permanence. We expect our jobs to remain secure, our relationships to stay the same, our bodies to resist time. When change arrives, as it always does, we feel betrayed. But the bowl reminds us that change is not betrayal. It is the law of existence itself. Think of your own life. Perhaps you had a plan for how things would unfold, a career path or a relationship that seemed certain. And then, like the bowl, it slipped from your hands and broke. In those moments, the pain feels unbearable, but if we look closer, much of the suffering comes not from the event itself, but from the refusal to accept what is already true. The bowl is broken. The job has ended. The relationship has shifted. When we can see impermanence clearly, grief transforms into understanding. Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom. Therapists speak of cognitive resistance, the way we add layers of pain by fighting reality. We tell ourselves it should not have happened, it must not change, it cannot be this way. And yet the more we resist, the sharper the edges cut us. The Buddha's teaching invites us to loosen our grip, to see that in the very breaking there is space for something new to emerge. Imagine a couple in a modern city. After years together, one day the relationship ends. At first it feels like the whole future has collapsed, as if the bowl of their shared life lies shattered on the floor. But slowly, as days pass, the truth of impermanence reveals another layer. Out of the broken pieces come lessons in resilience, in compassion, in what love truly means beyond possession. The ending was painful, but it was also a teacher, just as the bowl was a teacher to the young monk. The Japanese have a tradition called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the cracks visible rather than hidden. The bowl becomes more beautiful, not despite its breaking, but because of it. Although this practice came later than the Buddha's time, it harmonizes with his teaching. Our lives too can be mended with wisdom, with compassion, with acceptance. The scars do not erase the value. They reveal the story. Consider how this applies to the objects in your own life. A phone that stops working, a car that finally gives out, even a beloved book whose pages tear with age. Each one teaches impermanence. We mourn the loss not because the item had eternal value, but because we believed it could last forever. If we shift our perspective, we can appreciate every object more fully while it is with us. The coffee cup in your hand, the chair beneath you, the clothes you wear, all will one day be gone. And because they will be gone, they are infinitely precious right now. The broken bowl also speaks to the fragility of human life. We often live as though tomorrow is guaranteed, as if our bodies will never falter. But the truth of impermanence asks us to cherish today, to tell the people we love that we love them, to savor the meal in front of us, to notice the way light falls across the room. None of these moments will last. That is what makes them worth treasuring. The Buddha's lesson is not meant to bring despair but liberation. If nothing lasts, then our failures are not permanent either. The shame you felt years ago, the anger that once consumed you, even the mistakes that haunt you, they too are like bowls, broken and gone. They do not define you forever. This realization can be as freeing as it is humbling. Let us bring the teaching back into a practice for daily life. When something breaks, whether it is an object, a plan, or even your confidence, pause before rushing into judgment. Ask yourself, what is the bowl teaching me right now? Perhaps it is reminding you to appreciate more deeply. Perhaps it is urging you to let go. Perhaps it is inviting you to see that who you are is not shattered by what has broken. And so the Buddha's words echo gently across time. The bowl is broken, and in that breaking, it has fulfilled its purpose. In our own lives, we too will experience countless endings, countless small deaths, countless changes that feel like losses. But if we can look closely, we will see that each one carries a hidden gift. Each one points us back to the truth that life is not about holding on, but about learning to release. As the young monk lifted his eyes from the shards, he felt lighter. The lesson was not about punishment, but about freedom. He realized that the value of the bowl had never been in its permanence, but in the nourishment it provided, the service it gave, and now the wisdom it revealed. You too can carry this wisdom into your days. The next time you feel something slipping from your grasp, remember the bowl. Remember that nothing is meant to remain untouched by time, and in that remembering you may discover a peace that no loss can take from you. The third story, the woman and the bottle of water. The story of the broken bowl showed that impermanence is a teacher, not a thief. It invited us to see that loss is not the end of value, but the unfolding of change. Yet the Buddha knew that impermanence alone is not enough. Human beings also struggle with the fire of anger, the quick blaze that burns relationships, words, and even our own peace of mind. For that lesson, he offered the story of a woman named Priya and a very simple bottle of water. Priya was known in her village as someone kind-hearted, yet quick-tempered. When things did not go her way, she erupted with harsh words, and afterwards she was filled with regret. The people around her respected her generosity, but often kept their distance because they feared her temper. One day, after a quarrel with her husband that left both in tears, Priya walked to the temple in despair. She bowed before the Buddha and said, "Master, I do not wish to live this way anymore. Anger comes to me like a storm, and before I know it, I have hurt the people I love. Please give me something to cure this illness." The Buddha listened with patience and then handed her a small clay bottle filled with water. "Keep this with you," he said. "Each time you feel anger rising before you speak, take a sip. Hold it in your mouth for as long as you can. Only when the anger has softened may you swallow it." Priya was puzzled. Was this some kind of sacred water? She wanted to believe it was a miracle cure. Yet she trusted the Buddha, so she obeyed. Days passed. Whenever she felt her temper flare, she uncorked the bottle, took a sip, and held the water in her mouth. To her surprise, something began to change. The simple act of staying silent, of holding the water, gave her the pause she needed. The fire of her anger would burn for a few breaths, but without fuel from her words, it slowly cooled. Soon her husband and neighbors noticed the difference. She became calmer, gentler, less frightening. When she returned to the Buddha weeks later, she bowed in gratitude. "Master, the water has cured me." The Buddha smiled and said, "It was not the water that cured you. It was the silence. You gave yourself the space to let anger pass, and in that space, peace had room to grow." This story is at once humorous and profound. It reveals a truth that modern psychology echoes. Emotions are temporary waves. They rise, peak, and fall. What causes damage is not the emotion itself, but the reaction we attach to it. Anger that is given voice in the heat of the moment cuts like a blade, but anger observed in silence loses its power. Imagine a modern scenario. A woman in Toronto reads an email late at night. The words feel sharp, unfair, dismissive. Anger rises, and her fingers fly across the keyboard. But before hitting send, she remembers the bottle of water. She closes her laptop, takes a walk around the block, and breathes. By the time she returns, the fire has cooled. The next morning, she writes back with clarity, not rage. The relationship is preserved, the professional bond intact. Silence, not retaliation, became her strength. Or picture a man in New York stuck in traffic. The horn blasts, the minutes tick by, and frustration swells like a tide. His instinct is to shout, to pound the steering wheel, to curse the world around him. But then he remembers Priya. He takes a sip from the bottle he keeps in the car, holds it and waits. Within a few minutes, the tension eases. The cars eventually move as they always do, and he arrives not as a storm but as a calm presence ready to face the evening with his family. The brilliance of this teaching is its simplicity. We live in a culture that celebrates quick reactions. Social media thrives on instant responses, fiery comments, impulsive posts. But what if instead of reacting instantly, we carried an invisible bottle of water in our minds? What if we allowed silence to be our first response? How many arguments would soften? How many relationships would heal? How many nights would pass peacefully rather than in regret? The story also reminds us that silence is not weakness. Many fear that if they do not fight back immediately, they will lose power. But silence chosen with wisdom is not submission. It is mastery. It is the ability to stand in the middle of the fire without being consumed. The greatest warriors in history were not those who swung their swords at every provocation, but those who knew when to wait, when to act, and when to simply walk away. Consider the practice in your own life. The next time anger rises, imagine yourself holding the bottle. Do not rush to speak. Do not rush to act. Let the wave crest and fall. In the pause, you may discover that what seemed urgent no longer matters. Or, if it still matters, you can address it with clarity rather than rage. There is a powerful neurological truth here as well. Scientists today speak of the amygdala hijack, the surge of anger that takes over the brain. It lasts only a few minutes unless we feed it with more thoughts and reactions. By staying silent, by holding the water, we give the brain time to reset. The wisdom of the Buddha aligns with the discoveries of modern science. Emotions are temporary, but their impact depends on our response. Priya's story spread across her village. People began to see that change was possible. They admired not the miracle of the water, but the discipline of silence. And in time, her anger became not a curse, but a reminder of her strength. She learned to see each flare of temper as an invitation to pause, to breathe, to choose. What once controlled her became her teacher. In our own modern world, where conflicts flare in households, workplaces, and nations, this lesson is more urgent than ever. We may not carry clay bottles, but we can carry the same wisdom in our daily lives. Before we send the email, before we shout at the loved one, before we let the storm take us, we can pause. We can sip the water of silence. And in that pause, the possibility of peace opens. The Buddha did not tell Priya that she would never feel anger again. He did not promise a life without storms. Instead, he gave her a way to meet the storm differently. This is perhaps the most important truth of all. Peace is not the absence of difficult emotions, but the ability to hold them without being destroyed. As you listen to this story tonight, imagine the times you wished you could take back your words, the moments when silence might have saved you days of regret. Remember them not as failures, but as teachers. And then imagine how your life could change if in the next moment of anger you paused, if you allowed the silence to do its work. The woman with the bottle of water discovered that she was not a victim of her emotions, but the space in which emotions rise and fall. You too can discover this. You too can learn that silence is not emptiness but power, not weakness but wisdom. So, let the next wave of anger be your invitation. Reach for your bottle, whether real or imagined. Hold it. Wait. Watch the storm pass. And when it does, you will find yourself standing in a stillness more powerful than any outburst. That stillness is your true strength. The fourth story. The beggar and the lesson of giving. After the story of Priya and the bottle of water where silence turned into strength, the Buddha turned to another kind of suffering that quietly eats away at human beings. It is the belief that we have nothing to give. In every culture, in every age, people carry the silent fear of not being enough. We imagine that generosity belongs only to the wealthy, that kindness requires resources beyond our reach. Yet the Buddha told a story that shattered this illusion. It was the story of a beggar who discovered that the smallest offering can hold the greatest power. The beggar was a man who had lived in poverty for most of his life. His clothes were torn, his body frail, and his stomach often empty. He watched others bring gifts to the temple, bowls of rice, coins, fabrics, even flowers, and each time his heart sank. He thought, I am worthless, for I have nothing to give. One morning, with heavy steps, he approached the Buddha and confessed his shame. Master, he said, I see others offering food, wealth, and service, but I am poor. I cannot even feed myself properly. What could I possibly give that has any meaning? The Buddha looked at him with compassion and asked, Tell me, do you not have a smile to offer? Do you not have words that can comfort a weary traveler? Do you not have eyes that can show kindness, or hands that can help someone across the road? Even the smallest gesture, when given with a sincere heart, is a treasure. To think that you have nothing to give is the greatest poverty of all. The beggar was astonished. Could it be that a smile, a kind word, a moment of compassion was enough? The Buddha continued, True generosity does not measure the size of the gift, but the spirit in which it is given. A wealthy man can give mountains of gold and still feel empty if his heart is closed. But a poor man who shares his bread, even if it is only a single crust, is planting seeds of love that can nourish the world. This teaching rippled outward like water. The beggar began to experiment with what the Buddha had said. The next day, when he saw a woman struggling with a heavy jar, he carried it for her. Another time, when he passed a child crying by the roadside, he stopped to comfort him. He smiled at strangers, greeted them with warmth, and soon something miraculous happened. His sense of shame began to fade, replaced by a quiet joy. He realized he had been carrying riches all along. His presence, his voice, his compassion. What he once thought worthless became his greatest wealth. The story of the beggar speaks powerfully to the modern world. In our time, generosity is often measured in dollars, in visible charity, in impressive displays of giving. Social media is filled with videos of grand donations and dramatic acts of kindness. But beneath the surface, many ordinary people still whisper to themselves, I cannot help. I am too busy, too tired, too poor, too small to matter. The Buddha's story dismantles this narrative. It says that you, exactly as you are, already hold treasures capable of changing lives. Think of the last time someone offered you a smile when you were low, or when a friend listened to you without judgment. Those moments did not cost money. They cost presence, attention, and care. Yet they may have meant more than any material gift. When a co-worker pauses to say, I see how hard you are working, when a stranger opens the door for you on a difficult day, those small acts are reminders that you are not alone. They are invisible gifts that ripple far beyond the moment. In Toronto, a young man struggling with depression recalls how a simple text from a friend saying, I believe in you, kept him from giving up. In New York, a single mother remembers the day her neighbor watched her children for an hour so she could rest. In Paris, a woman thinks of the stranger who helped her carry her groceries when her arms were weak. None of these gifts required wealth. Each was a simple gesture born from compassion. Each carried the power of transformation. The Buddha's teaching is radical because it removes excuses. It tells us that no one is too poor to give. No one is too broken to help. No one is too small to make a difference. Even in moments when you feel empty, you still carry the capacity to offer something. And the paradox is this: the act of giving replenishes the giver. The beggar who once felt worthless discovered his worth through the act of giving. Generosity did not deplete him, it nourished him. There is also a practical wisdom here for our busy age. People often ask, how can I practice generosity when I have so little time? The answer is hidden in the story. You can offer presence to a child who longs to be heard. You can offer patience to a colleague under pressure. You can offer forgiveness to someone who hurt you, and in that forgiveness free both of you. Generosity is not a scheduled act. It is a way of walking through the world, noticing the needs around you and responding with what you have. Science today confirms what the Buddha taught. Studies show that acts of kindness release oxytocin, the hormone of connection, and endorphins, the body's natural painkillers. Generosity strengthens relationships, reduces stress, and even improves physical health. In other words, to give is to heal not only others but yourself. The beggar became richer through his giving, not in material possessions but in joy, dignity, and connection. The same is true for us today. Imagine carrying this lesson into your own life. Picture a day where instead of waiting to be recognized, you decide to recognize others. Instead of focusing on what you lack, you notice what you can offer. Perhaps it is a smile at the cashier, a listening ear to a friend, or a compliment to someone who doubts themselves. By the end of the day, you may discover that your world feels lighter. The act of giving shifts the focus from scarcity to abundance, from self-centered worry to shared humanity. The story of the beggar also reveals something deeper about identity. Many of us measure ourselves by achievements, wealth, or status. But the Buddha reminds us that the true measure of a person is not what they accumulate, but what they offer. A life that clings only to possession becomes narrow and fearful. A life that flows outward in generosity becomes vast and free. The beggar who once shrank in shame expanded into joy when he learned to give. As the story concludes, the beggar no longer called himself poor. He understood that his riches were of a different kind. They were the treasures of compassion, of presence, of kindness freely given. And in that realization, he found a peace that wealth could never buy. So remember this truth tonight. You are never without something to give. Even if your pockets are empty, your heart is not. Even if your schedule is full, there is always a moment to smile, to listen, to care. And each time you give, you join the beggar in discovering that generosity is not about the size of the offering, but about the openness of the heart. The fifth story, the merchant and the cup of water. The beggar discovered that the smallest act of generosity can transform both the giver and the receiver. But the Buddha also knew that many human struggles are not about having too little to give, but about holding too much inside. Worry, regret, and endless thoughts can weigh a person down more than any physical burden. For this truth, he told the story of a weary merchant and a simple cup of water. The merchant was named Virat. He was successful in trade, traveling with carts of goods from one city to another. His name was respected, his family well cared for, but his mind was never at rest. Day and night he carried invisible burdens, fear of losing his fortune, regret over past mistakes, worry about his children, and endless calculations of profit and loss. Though his body was strong, his spirit was heavy. One evening, after a long journey, he came to the Buddha seeking relief. "Master," he said, "I feel as though I carry the weight of the world. My goods are heavy, but not as heavy as my thoughts. How can I put them down?" The Buddha asked him to hold out his hand. Into it he placed a simple clay cup filled with water. "Hold this cup," the Buddha said. Virat obeyed. The cup was light, almost effortless to carry. Minutes passed. The Buddha asked, "How does it feel?" "Light, Master," Virat replied. More minutes passed. The Buddha did not speak. The silence stretched. Virat's arm began to tremble. The cup, once light, now felt heavier with every moment. His hand ached, his shoulder tightened, sweat formed on his brow. At last he gasped, "Master, the cup is too heavy. I cannot hold it any longer." The Buddha gently took the cup back and said, "This is what you do with your thoughts. A small worry is light at first, but when you hold on to it without rest, it grows unbearable. If you put the cup down for a while, it remains the same cup, but your strength is renewed. So it is with the burdens of the mind. Do not carry them all the time. Put them down. Rest. Then pick them up again if you must." The lesson struck Virat deeply. He realized that his suffering was not from the weight of his responsibilities, but from the way he clung to them without pause. He bowed with gratitude, for he understood that peace did not mean abandoning his duties, but learning when to set them aside. This image of the cup of water speaks to every age, but perhaps never more clearly than now. In the modern world, people carry invisible cups everywhere. They carry them through traffic, into offices, onto airplanes, even into their bedrooms at night. The cup is filled with deadlines, bills, expectations, regrets, and fears of the future. The problem is not the existence of these things, but the constant grip we keep on them. We forget to put them down. Think about your own life. Perhaps you finish work yet carry the weight of tasks unfinished long into the evening. Perhaps you replay conversations in your head, imagining what you should have said or fearing what others think of you. Perhaps you lie awake at night rehearsing disasters that may never come. Each of these thoughts is a cup in your hand. For a moment, they are light, but hour after hour, day after day, they exhaust you. The wisdom of the story is simple. Rest is not weakness. Putting the cup down is not failure. It is the only way to regain strength. In Western culture, especially in places like America and Canada, people are often praised for constant busyness. To be always available, always working, always thinking ahead is considered a badge of honor. But the Buddha invites us to imagine another way of living. To pause, to breathe, to let the mind rest is not laziness, but wisdom. Imagine a mother in Chicago working late into the night, her mind racing with worries for her children. If she could put the cup down even for an hour of quiet breathing, she would find new strength to care for them. Imagine a student in London carrying the pressure of exams and expectations. If he could put the cup down for a walk under the open sky, he might return with a clear mind and a calmer heart. Imagine a worker in Montreal carrying the weight of debts and deadlines. If he could put the cup down each evening with gratitude for what has already been done, his life would feel lighter. There is also a deeper layer to this story. The cup of water is not only a symbol of worry, it is a symbol of identity. Many of us grip tightly to the stories we tell about ourselves. I am a failure. I am not enough. I must always achieve. I must never make mistakes. These self-made stories are cups we hold day and night, and they become unbearably heavy. But when we dare to put them down, even for a moment, we discover a freedom that has been waiting all along. The practice is not complicated. The next time you feel overwhelmed, imagine the cup in your hand. Ask yourself, how long have I been holding this thought? Then set it down. This may mean writing it in a journal so you no longer carry it in your head. It may mean pausing for meditation, prayer, or a simple walk. It may mean saying to yourself, I will think about this tomorrow, but tonight I will rest. In that act of putting the cup down, you create space for renewal. Modern neuroscience supports this wisdom. Studies show that constant rumination, holding thoughts without pause, increases stress, anxiety, and even physical pain. Taking breaks allows the brain to reset, creativity to emerge, and the nervous system to calm. The Buddha's metaphor of the cup is as scientifically sound as it is spiritually profound. The story of Virat reminds us that life will always bring responsibilities. The cup will always be filled again. But the art of living is not to avoid the cup, nor to hold it endlessly, but to know when to lift it and when to let it rest. This balance is what transforms survival into peace. As Virat left the Buddha that day, he felt lighter, though his possessions had not changed. The carts were still full, the debts still real, the responsibilities still waiting. But in his heart he knew that he could face them differently. He could hold them when needed and release them when not. He could live not as a prisoner of his thoughts, but as their master. And so can we. Tonight, as you listen, ask yourself, what cup have I been holding too long? Is it a regret, a fear, a constant pressure? Can I put it down even for a while? Can I trust that the world will not collapse if I rest? The answer is yes. And in that rest you may find the strength to lift the cup again tomorrow with clarity and peace. The sixth story, the night of awakening under the Bodhi tree. The merchant Virat learned that even the heaviest burden grows unbearable when carried without pause, and that peace can be found by putting the cup down. Yet the Buddha's greatest lesson was not spoken through metaphors alone, but through the night of his own awakening. It was a night that changed not only his life but the history of countless generations who followed. To understand the depth of peace, we must return to that night beneath the Bodhi tree when Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha. Siddhartha had walked a long road. Born a prince, he had tasted every comfort and luxury, but he could not ignore the truth of human suffering. He saw sickness, old age, and death, and he realized that wealth and pleasure could not shield anyone from pain. He left his palace searching through years of hardship and study. He trained with teachers, fasted until his body was skeletal, and meditated until his mind felt like fire. Yet still, the answers eluded him. He discovered that extreme deprivation was no more liberating than extreme indulgence. Both were cages of their own kind. One evening, weak from years of striving, Siddhartha sat beneath a Bodhi tree near the river Nairanjana. He made a vow. I will not rise from this place until I have discovered the truth that ends suffering. The air was heavy with silence, the stars above glimmering like witnesses. In that stillness, his journey reached its turning point. As he sat, the legends say that Mara, the embodiment of desire and fear, appeared. Mara brought visions of temptation, riches, power, and beautiful forms, but Siddhartha saw them as illusions passing like clouds across the sky. Then Mara unleashed fear, storms, armies, weapons, thunder that shook the earth. Yet Siddhartha remained unmoved, grounded like the roots of the tree itself. Finally, Mara struck at his deepest doubt, whispering, "Who are you to claim enlightenment? By what right do you sit here?" In answer, Siddhartha reached his hand to the earth. The ground itself bore witness, as if the whole of existence affirmed his right to seek truth. At that moment, Mara's illusions faded like mist at dawn. The night grew still again, and Siddhartha turned inward deeper than he had ever gone. As dawn approached, he saw with absolute clarity the nature of existence. He understood the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. He saw that suffering is woven not into life itself, but into our craving and resistance. He realized that peace comes not from clinging or rejecting, but from seeing reality as it truly island. In that moment, Siddhartha became the Buddha, the awakened one. From this awakening came the Four Noble Truths teachings that remain as relevant today as they were under the branches of the Bodhi tree. The first truth, life contains suffering not as punishment, but as part of being human. The second truth, suffering arises from craving, from the endless desire to hold on to what changes, or to push away what we fear. The third truth, suffering can cease because craving can cease. And the fourth truth, there is a path, the Noble Eightfold Path, a way of living with wisdom, compassion, and balance that leads to freedom. These truths may sound ancient, but they echo in every modern life. In America, a businessman works endless hours, craving success, yet finds himself restless and hollow. In Europe, a young woman scrolls through images of beauty online, craving approval, yet feels more insecure with each passing hour. In Canada, a father longs for the past, resisting the truth of his child growing older, and suffers in his inability to let go. Each of these lives is caught in the same net of craving and resistance that Siddhartha saw beneath the Bodhi tree. But the awakening also offers hope. Just as Siddhartha discovered suffering is not permanent, it can end when we release the grip of craving. Imagine the businessman realizing that his worth is not tied to his wealth. Imagine the young woman discovering that her beauty is not measured by comparison but by the kindness she carries. Imagine the father learning to celebrate the changes in his child instead of clinging to what was. Each of these awakenings is a reflection of that first dawn under the Bodhi tree. What makes this story powerful is that it is not only about the Buddha, it is about us. The Bodhi tree is not just a place in India, but a symbol of the moment when any person chooses to stop running, stop grasping, and sit fully with life as its island. Every time you face your own Mara, whether it is desire, fear, or self-doubt, you are reliving that night. Every time you refuse to be swept away by illusions, you touch the same strength that carried Siddhartha through the darkness. The Bodhi tree also teaches us about balance. The Buddha did not achieve peace through indulgence or denial, but through the middle path. In our world of extremes, this is a lesson worth repeating. We swing between overwork and exhaustion, between indulgence and guilt, between obsession and avoidance. But the middle path invites us to live with moderation, to honor the needs of the body and the spirit, to work without being enslaved by work, to rest without falling into laziness. Imagine applying this in daily life. Instead of reaching for the next distraction each time boredom arises, sit with the feeling and watch it fade. Instead of pushing yourself past exhaustion, pause and rest without shame. Instead of drowning in cravings for recognition, remember the truth of impermanence, that every praise and every criticism will pass like clouds across the sky. The middle path is not an abstract philosophy. It is a way of walking, eating, speaking, and breathing each day. As the sun rose on that fateful morning, the Buddha looked upon the world with new eyes. He saw suffering, but he also saw freedom. He saw pain, but he also saw compassion arising from pain. And he realized that every person carries the capacity for awakening within them. This was not a gift reserved for a chosen few. It was the nature of being human. When we remember this story, we are reminded that peace is not something distant. It is already within reach, waiting in the silence beneath our own Bodhi trees. It may come when you close your eyes in a quiet room, when you walk slowly under autumn leaves, or when you face your own fears with courage. It is there whenever you choose to stop fighting and simply see. The night of awakening is not just history, it is an invitation. Each of us has burdens like Virat, tempers like Priya, doubts like the beggar, or grief like countless others. And each of us has a Bodhi tree within a place where we can rest, let the illusions pass, and discover that beneath the noise a deeper peace is already present. As you hear these words, imagine yourself sitting beneath that tree. The night may be long and Mara may whisper, but dawn always comes. and with it comes the possibility of awakening not as something mystical, but as the simple and profound realization that peace has been within you all along. The seventh story, the king and the gift of selfless sacrifice. The night of awakening beneath the Bodhi tree revealed that freedom lies in the middle path and in the release of craving. Yet even with wisdom, one question remains for every human being. How far are we willing to go for others? The Buddha often spoke about compassion not as an idea but as the very heart of a meaningful life. To illustrate this, he told the story of a great king who discovered that true power does not come from conquest or wealth, but from the willingness to give everything, even life itself, for the sake of others. The king's name was Mahadana. His reign stretched over fertile lands, rivers rich with fish, and mountains that yielded treasures of gold and stone. To his subjects he was both protector and provider, but inside his palace, Mahadana wrestled with an unseen burden. Despite his riches, he sensed that something vital was missing. His heart longed not for more land or jewels, but for a truth that could give his life meaning beyond the crown. One day, while riding through his kingdom, Mahadana came upon a group of travelers. They were starving, their clothes ragged, their faces hollow with hunger. The king's guards urged him to pass by quickly, for these were strangers with no allegiance to his throne. But Mahadana dismounted his horse and approached them. He asked where they had come from, and they told him of famine in their homeland, of villages where even children had wasted away. The sight pierced him. That night he could not sleep. Surrounded by luxury, he thought of the faces of those travelers. He wondered what use were his treasures if he could not alleviate the suffering of his people, and even of strangers. The next morning, Mahadana gathered his ministers and declared that he would open the royal granaries to feed the hungry. Some praised him. Others objected, warning that such generosity would deplete the kingdom's wealth. But Mahadana answered, "What is the value of gold stored away while children starve? A king's true riches are measured not by what he hoards, but by the lives he saves." As weeks passed, more and more travelers arrived seeking refuge. The royal stores diminished, and the court grew uneasy. Still, Mahadana gave freely. Then one day, when there was little left, a sage appeared at the gates. He asked to see the king. When granted audience, he spoke, "Mighty one, I have come not for grain or gold, but for a deeper gift. Would you offer even your own life, if it could end the suffering of many?" The court gasped. Such a request seemed outrageous, but Mahadana remained calm. He looked around his hall at the pillars carved from stone, at the guards, armed with spears, at the ministers cloaked in silk. He realized that all of this was temporary. His body, too, was temporary. If his life could be the seed for others to live, then it was a worthy offering. The king bowed his head and said, "Yes, even my life I would give. For what is a crown worth if worn without compassion? What is a life worth if lived only for oneself?" The sage smiled, for this was the answer he sought. It is said that at that moment, the palace itself seemed to shine with light. The sage revealed that he was no ordinary traveler, but a messenger of truth. He told Mahadana that the willingness to sacrifice was the highest form of love, greater than any wealth. The kingdom flourished not because of stored treasures, but because of the heart of its king. This story may sound distant, yet it touches something very close to our own lives. In the West, in countries like the United States, Canada, or across Europe, sacrifice is often misunderstood. It is seen as loss, as giving up something we would rather keep. But the story of Mahadana shows sacrifice as gain, as the opening of the heart to a meaning far beyond self-interest. Think about the sacrifices you have witnessed in your own life. A parent who wakes before dawn to provide for their children. A teacher who stays late to encourage a struggling student. A nurse who works through exhaustion to comfort patients in their final moments. These are not acts of weakness, but of profound strength. Like Mahadana, they reveal that the highest form of wealth is compassion expressed through action. The king's lesson also speaks to the modern obsession with accumulation. Our culture often tells us that happiness lies in having more possessions, more recognition, more security. But deep down, we know that endless accumulation leaves us empty. Mahadana reminds us that joy is found not in what we cling to, but in what we release for the sake of others. When we give, we discover a kind of wealth that cannot be measured in coins or possessions. Science today echoes this wisdom. Studies show that altruism increases happiness, lowers stress, and even extends life expectancy. Generosity activates regions of the brain associated with pleasure, creating a sense of fulfillment more lasting than material gain. What the Buddha taught through Mahadana's story is now confirmed in laboratories. The human heart is wired for compassion. Yet the story goes deeper still. It asks us not only to give when convenient, but to examine what we hold most tightly. What would it mean to live with the spirit of Mahadana, willing to sacrifice even comfort, even pride, even life itself for the well-being of others? For some, this may mean standing up against injustice, though it costs reputation. For others, it may mean sharing time with someone lonely, though it interrupts our schedule. For parents, it may mean endless quiet sacrifices that children may never fully see but that shape their lives forever. The story also warns us of fear. Many in Mahadana's court resisted his generosity out of fear of loss. Fear is often the greatest barrier to compassion. We fear we will not have enough if we give. We fear we will be taken advantage of. But the king's courage shows us that when we move beyond fear, we enter a space of freedom where compassion flows without measure. Imagine carrying this lesson into your own community. In a city like New York, where millions walk past one another each day, what would it look like to live with the heart of Mahadana? Perhaps it would be offering time to mentor a child in need. In a Canadian town, it might mean organizing food for neighbors during a harsh winter. In Europe, it could mean welcoming strangers fleeing hardship. Each act may not require the sacrifice of life itself, but it carries the same spirit of giving beyond oneself. As Mahadana's story spread, his people remembered him not for the gold in his treasury or the size of his armies, but for his heart. The true legacy of a life is not the monuments built in our name, but the lives touched by our compassion. And so the Buddha's teaching lives on. The king's greatness was not in ruling with power, but in choosing to serve with love. The highest gift is not wealth, but willingness. The greatest crown is not made of gold, but of compassion worn in every act of selfless giving. As you reflect tonight, ask yourself, what am I holding so tightly that it prevents me from giving? Can I release it even a little to ease the suffering of another? What would it mean to live with the heart of a king who knew that true power is found not in what we keep, but in what we give away? The story of Mahadana is not a distant tale of an ancient king. It is an invitation for each of us. For in every act of compassion, no matter how small, we share in his legacy. And perhaps the measure of our lives will not be the titles we earn or the wealth we gather, but the sacrifices we make for the love of others. The eighth story, the Silent Lotus. The story of King Mahadana revealed that the highest form of wealth is compassion, that true power is found not in what we guard, but in what we give away. Yet even compassion, when expressed only through words and actions, can fall short of the deepest truth. Some teachings cannot be spoken. Some truths are so vast that words cannot hold them, so delicate that language would only break their beauty. For that lesson, the Buddha offered a teaching without words, a sermon not delivered in sound but in silence, through the simple act of holding up a lotus flower. It was a gathering of disciples on a quiet morning. The air was still, the sun soft upon the leaves, and everyone waited eagerly to hear the Buddha speak. They had come expecting parables, wisdom, and answers to the questions that filled their minds. But on that day, the Buddha said nothing. He simply raised a lotus blossom in his hand and held it before the assembly. The disciples looked on in confusion. What did it mean? Some whispered to each other, trying to interpret the gesture. Was it a symbol of purity, of impermanence, of beauty rising from the mud? Many minds raced, but no voice rose with certainty. Then one disciple, Mahakasyapa, simply smiled. In that moment, something passed between master and student, silent and undeniable. The Buddha returned the smile. That single smile was the transmission of a truth beyond words, a recognition that awakening is not always taught but directly seen. This story, known as the Flower Sermon, reveals that the deepest truths are not always grasped by logic or explained by speech. They are experienced directly. Just as a flower does not need to explain its fragrance or justify its bloom, so too certain moments in life speak without words. In the West, we often live in a world of endless noise. Words fill our screens, arguments fill our airwaves, explanations chase us through each day. We hunger for analysis, for clarity, for commentary. But the Buddha's lotus reminds us that there is a wisdom beyond language, a knowing that comes not from explanation, but from presence. Sometimes the most powerful teaching is silence. Think of a time when words failed you. Perhaps you sat at the bedside of someone you loved as they slipped away. No words could capture what you felt, yet the silent presence of holding their hand said more than any speech. Or perhaps you stood at the edge of the ocean, the vast horizon stretching out beyond measure. No explanation could capture that feeling. The silence itself was the teaching. In American culture, silence is often misunderstood. It can be seen as awkward, uncomfortable, or even weak. People rush to fill every gap in conversation, fearing that quiet means disconnection. But the story of the lotus invites us to see silence differently. Silence can be connection. Silence can be trust. Silence can be the ground upon which truth blossoms. Imagine a teacher who, instead of answering every question, immediately pauses and lets the students wrestle with the unknown. In that pause, understanding deepens. Imagine a parent who sits quietly beside their child in sadness, not rushing to fix it, simply offering presence. In that quiet, love is felt. Imagine a couple who walk together under the night sky, saying nothing yet feeling more connected than in hours of conversation. This is the lotus. This is the teaching without words. There is also a practical invitation here. In your daily life, create moments of silent lotus. Turn off the phone for a few minutes each day. Sit with your breath. Walk without music or podcasts filling your ears. Let silence speak. At first it may feel strange, even uncomfortable, but slowly you may begin to notice that silence is not empty. It is full of awareness, full of presence, full of truths that language cannot carry. Modern science confirms the value of this ancient practice. Studies show that silence reduces stress, enhances creativity, and improves memory. Neurologists have found that periods of quiet allow the brain to reorganize, integrate experiences, and restore balance. In other words, silence heals. The Buddha knew this long before science gave it a name. The lotus also carries a deeper symbol. It blooms from the mud, rising unstained through murky water to open its petals to the Sunday. In the same way, our lives are rooted in struggle, in mistakes, in pain. Yet from that very mud can grow beauty, compassion, and wisdom. The silent sermon of the lotus was not only about speechless teaching, but about the possibility of transformation. From the mud of suffering can rise the flower of awakening. Consider how this image applies to modern life. A man in Paris loses his job and feels buried in the mud of failure. Yet in the silence of reflection, he discovers a new path, a chance to pursue work that aligns with his true values. A woman in Toronto struggles through heartbreak, the mud of loss pulling at her feet. Yet, in the quiet of meditation, she begins to feel a seed of compassion growing within her, ready to bloom in time. A student in California drowns in anxiety, the mud of pressure heavy upon her. Yet in a moment of silence, she finds space to breathe, space to remember that she is more than her fears. Each of these lives reflects the lotus rising from the mud to reveal unexpected beauty. The story of the silent lotus also challenges our obsession with explanations. Not everything must be explained to be real. Not everything must be understood to be true. Some experiences must simply be lived. To demand words for every truth is to miss the fragrance of the flower itself. When Mahakasyapa smiled, he did not explain, he did not analyze, he simply saw. And the Buddha's smile confirmed the seeing. This was enough. Sometimes in life, when we stop explaining and simply allow ourselves to see, we too discover what has been there all along. Tonight, as you hear this story, let yourself imagine the lotus in your own hands. Hold it silently in your mind. Do not ask what it means. Do not demand an explanation. Just see it. Just be with it. In that silent presence, perhaps you will feel the same smile that passed between teacher and student. A recognition that truth is not always spoken, but always present. The teaching of the lotus flower is that silence itself can be wisdom, that stillness itself can be full of meaning, and that out of the mud of our lives, something pure and beautiful can rise. So the next time you sit with someone in pain and feel the urge to rush into words, remember the lotus. Offer your presence instead. The next time your mind races to explain or justify, remember the lotus. Let silence be enough. For in the stillness of silence, truth blooms in ways that no speech could ever capture. The ninth story, the journey of the lost ox. The silent lotus revealed that some truths are beyond words, that silence itself can teach more deeply than explanations. Yet there remains one more lesson, perhaps the most intimate of all. The search for awakening is not about finding something outside of ourselves, but about remembering what has never been lost. To explain this, the Buddha told the parable of the lost ox. In ancient villages across Asia, the ox was the farmer's most valuable companion. It carried the plow, pulled the cart, and sustained life through its strength. To lose an ox was to lose security, nourishment, and stability. So when the story begins with a man who had misplaced his ox, everyone understood the weight of his despair. The man searched day and night, combing the fields, the forests, and the mountainsides. He questioned neighbors, scoured riverbanks, and wandered through valleys, calling the ox by name. His body grew thin, his voice hoarse, his feet sore from the endless pursuit. Yet still the ox was nowhere to be found. At last, exhausted, he sat beneath a tree, his mind quieted if only from fatigue. In that stillness he felt a stirring, a faint recognition. He looked inward rather than outward and realized something astonishing: the ox had never been lost. It had been with him all along, grazing calmly nearby, hidden not by distance but by his own restless searching. The parable of the lost ox mirrors the spiritual path itself. We spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, searching for peace, fulfillment, and enlightenment. We chase after teachers, books, methods, and practices. We run from one distraction to another, convinced that the answer lies just beyond the next horizon. And yet, like the man in the story, we often fail to see that what we are seeking has been with us from the beginning. In Western life, this pattern is strikingly familiar. In America, people spend fortunes on self-help programs, diets, and productivity tools, hoping for the secret that will finally bring peace. In Europe, countless seekers travel to distant retreats or ancient sites, believing that enlightenment lies in foreign landscapes. In Canada, individuals chase after success and validation, thinking that once they achieve recognition, their restlessness will end. But the ox of peace, the ox of awakening, is never elsewhere. It is grazing quietly within, waiting for us to stop running and simply see. The story also reveals a tender irony. The harder the man searched, the further away the ox seemed. His desperate grasping only blinded him more. This reflects one of the most profound teachings of the Buddha awakening, is not about striving harder, but about letting go. The more we force ourselves to find peace, the more elusive it becomes. But when we stop, when we allow the mind to settle, the truth appears by itself, as clear and steady as the ox beside us. Imagine your own life as this search. Think of the times you have believed happiness was hidden in the next achievement, the next purchase, the next relationship. Each time you chased the ox, only to discover that satisfaction faded quickly. Now imagine pausing. Imagine sitting quietly beneath your own tree, breathing slowly and realizing that the peace you long for is already here, in this very breath, in this very moment. That is the ox. That is the discovery waiting in the silence. The lost ox also teaches us about identity. Many of us feel that we are broken, incomplete, or missing something essential. We tell ourselves we must become better, smarter, wealthier, more spiritual. But the parable whispers another truth. You are not broken. You are not incomplete. The ox of your true nature has never been lost. It is only hidden by the restless dust of craving and fear. When that dust settles, you see that you already carry the strength, the wisdom, and the compassion you have been searching for. Consider a modern image. A young professional in New York spends years climbing the corporate ladder, believing that once he reaches the top, he will finally feel whole. But when he arrives, he feels emptier than before. One evening, he walks through Central Park, sits on a bench, and for the first time in years, simply breathes without agenda. In that moment of stillness, he glimpses the truth. The peace he wanted was never at the top of the ladder. It was in his own awareness, waiting all along. That was his ox. Or picture a woman in Paris who has chased love through countless relationships, hoping each time that the next person will complete her. After heartbreak upon heartbreak, she sits alone by the Seine and realizes through her tears that she is not missing half of herself. She has been whole from the beginning. The ox of her true self was never gone. That realization frees her to love, not from desperation, but from fullness. The parable also connects back to the other stories we have heard. The lake teaches us that clarity comes when we stop stirring. The broken bowl teaches that impermanence is natural. The bottle of water shows us that silence cools anger. The beggar reveals that generosity is always possible. The cup reminds us to set down our burdens. The Bodhi tree reveals the path of awakening. The king shows us the strength of sacrifice. The lotus blossoms in silence. And now the ox reminds us that all of these truths are not distant treasures to be found, but reflections of the peace already within us. The journey of the ox ends where it began, with the realization that there was never a need to search. This is the heart of the teaching. Awakening is not about becoming something new, but about remembering what you already are. Just as the man discovered his ox grazing nearby, you too can discover your own stillness, your own compassion, your own clarity, waiting patiently beneath the noise of daily life. Tonight, as you reflect on this story, imagine that you have been searching for something perhaps for years. Imagine the exhaustion of the chase, the endless questions, the restless striving. Then imagine sitting quietly, breathing, and realizing that what you sought has always been with you. The ox is not lost. Neither are you. This is the closing gift of the Buddha's teaching. You are already whole. You are already enough. The awakening you long for is not a distant prize, but a present reality waiting to be seen. All that is required is to stop, to breathe, to open your eyes, and to recognize what has been here all along. As we come to the end of this journey, each story lingers like a lantern left burning in the night. The lake that teaches clarity, the broken bowl that whispers of impermanence, the bottle of water that cools anger, the beggar who discovers the wealth of giving, the cup that shows us when to rest, the Bodhi tree that awakens truth, the king who offers selfless sacrifice, the lotus that blooms in silence, and the ox that was never lost. Together they form a path not of distant miracles, but of simple truths lived here and now. These stories are not locked in the past. They are alive each time you pause, each time you listen, each time you allow yourself to see. They invite you to lay down your burdens, to give freely, to walk with compassion, and to remember that peace is not something you must chase. It is already within you, waiting to be recognized. So tonight, let these teachings settle into your heart. Carry them into tomorrow, not as heavy commandments, but as gentle companions guiding your steps. Remember that even the smallest act of kindness, the briefest moment of silence, or the simplest breath of awareness can change not only your life, but the life of someone beside you. And now I ask you to join this circle of reflection. Share in the comments which story touched you most. Was it the silent lotus, the king's sacrifice, or the lost ox? Your voice may be the reminder someone else needs tonight. Subscribe if you wish to continue walking this path together, and let us know where in the world you are listening from. For in sharing, in connecting, and in remembering, we keep these timeless truths alive.